Hi, Meg here. There's something I talk to senior clients about when they've got a vision and they're not feeling like people are engaging with it. And there's some really clear advice I think I can give you based on the psychology of adult development, which is kind of hidden away in the corner of academia and the internet, which isn't very visible. And I've spent a few years looking at it, studying it, and I think it's got some direct access, direct connection with doing presentations. So I'm going to try and make this not breathless, even though we're going to try and do it in 10 minutes. And apologies, action logic scholars, this isn't for you. We're making this a really practical approach to how you can talk about your vision in a way which engages a broader swathe of people. There's been a bunch of research about adult development and the stages adults can go through when they're approaching complexity and mess. And there are some reasonably clear thresholds which are worth labelling, which help you to understand where people are at right now and where their current centre of gravity of the lens that they look through the world sits. Most people somewhere around their teenagehood begin to want to belong, and so we begin to look around us and look for how do we be more like the people around us. In work, this translates as being a good team member, and there's functional ways and dysfunctional ways that this plays out. So there's a stage where people move through the world where their main concern is belonging. Then some of us then begin to want to stand out from that belonging and become more of an expert in what we do. Timelines begin to get longer, like 3 months to a year is where people comfortably sit with this lens on the world. And people who are at the expert stage really focus on problem solving with that shorter timeline of 1 to 3 months, maybe 6 months. Some of us then, because of the complexity of the roles or the projects that we're involved in, begin to think more strategically. So much longer timelines, something like 3 years, maybe longer, 5 years, begin to spot annual cycles, are much more involved in having empathy for different perspectives, but are very focused on outcomes, on making stuff happen in the world and engaging people so that they get on board with the thing that you want to do and are very open. People at this stage are very open to feedback on their methods so they get better at what they do. So people at that stage are very focused on outcomes, goals, hitting the numbers, getting the stuff done in the world. So those two stages, the problem stage, experts, and the next stage around outcomes, which you call achiever, are independent stages of leadership. Then there's a threshold where people who are at the stage where they're really good at getting stuff done then begin to look at the world and realise there's a lot that's still broken and that they only have one part of the truth, and that really if you want to make things happen you need to bring people together and create inclusion because it's really important, and that you're only going to have sustainable solutions if you think longer term and bring people together, and you're beginning to spot patterns and be much more comfortable with mess and complexity and the where you can your human reach. And people at this stage, which we call redefining, they often want to just burn a thing down. And it can be quite a volatile stage, and also there's a shift underneath of being a little bit lost, because the world is full of experts and achievers who want you to solve problems and hit the numbers. There's a stage beyond redefining where sometimes we get to where people are able to look at the mess and complexity in the world and somehow find some peace with it, and still create change by thinking in much longer time horizons, or able to deal with multiple time horizons, very much around holding, planting seeds and growing. People at this stage use a lot of gardening metaphors, and it's where it's almost like a resting place between when you're leaving achiever and having your world totally shaken as you go through the redefining stage, and you end up at this transforming stage where you're much more able to find some peace and take action based on the mess of the world. So what does this mean for you when you're talking about your vision? If you think about the way that you're framing things, sometimes if you're at the interdependent stages, so the redefining and the transforming stage, you can do a lot of talking in metaphors and things that make connections, spotting patterns that seem reasonably obvious to you. And one of the things around these stages is we tend to be able to see into the next stage and see that it's a good thing, but the stage beyond that is really enigmatic to us. So if you've got a lot of people who are at the stage of either belonging or expert, and you're talking at the redefining or transforming stage, they literally don't understand what you're talking about. They're not just being negative, like it's just beyond the way. It's a very different way of processing the world than they process it. So as you're talking about your vision, if you think about those stages and think, okay, so particularly the people who are listening to you in an organisation are likely to be somewhere around experts, problem solvers, achievers who are really interested in outcomes, and maybe there's going to be a few people who are much more beginning to think about culture and holding the space. So if you're able to frame your recommendations to go, these are the problems that my recommendation is going to solve, my vision. These are how it's going to begin to help us hit the numbers and create more able to create outcomes in the world. And then you can also begin to say these are the ways that it's going to shift bigger systems and plant seeds for the future. But being able to include all of those perspectives, and maybe a little bit of how it's going to affect people who want to belong to a good team, then you're going to be able to create a vision which people are much more able to mesh with and engage with. I see people generally only speaking in their stage, and if you're able to, particularly if you're at the interdependent stages, you need to be able to code switch across those stages so that you're able to bring people along and also help them to grow the ability to appreciate a bigger picture. So I hope that's useful. And there's loads more. I can ask me about more links and books and stuff, because this is something that's really central to my leadership coaching practice. But I also think it's just a good rubric to have in your mind, rule of thumb to have in your mind when you're framing your vision as you're explaining it to people.